The needle gleamed under the sterile light of the veterinary clinic. Dr. Abigail Porter, her face calm but her eyes burdened, stood poised with the final injection in hand. Across the room, behind cold metal bars, a gaunt German shepherd named Ranger stood perfectly still. Once a proud working dog, now his coat was caked in mud and his frame had wasted to little more than muscle and bone. But his eyes, those intelligent, searching eyes, never left the syringe. "It's protocol, Frank," Sheriff Tom Bennett said, his voice heavy with regret. "The dog was found with a child. She was injured. We can't take chances." Frank Mitchell, leaning heavily on a hickory cane, didn't move. His voice was low, steady. "You're making a mistake, Tom. That dog wasn't the threat. He was trying to help." Across the room, arms folded and mouth tight, stood Margaret Winters, 78 and never shy about her opinions. "I saw what I saw," she said firmly. "That beast had blood on its muzzle and was standing over that poor Anderson girl." A clock ticked mercilessly in the silence. 3 minutes remained until the scheduled euthanasia. In his kennel, Ranger let out a soft, almost imperceptible whimper. His mind flickered. Flashes of darkness, rushing water, a little girl's small hand clutching his fur, the look in her eyes as she struggled to hold on while the current threatened to pull her away. Dr. Porter approached the cage, key in hand. Ranger didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply watched, waited. This wasn't the kind of story people expected to come out of Oakage, Georgia. Tucked into the foothills with fewer than 5,000 residents, Oakage was the sort of place where time moved slow and steady. The kind of town where church bells still marked the hour, and folks waved to each other from their porches. Its only claims to fame were an abandoned quarry and a vast underground drainage system, built in the 1950s to manage summer floods. But for Ranger, who once had another name, another life, none of that mattered. Not anymore. Just 3 months ago, he wasn't Ranger, he was Rex, badge number K97. A decorated K9 officer with the Dallas Police Department. His record spoke volumes. 12 major drug busts, 3 missing children located alive, and a silver star for K9 valor after saving his handler's life during a warehouse collapse. But all of that had come to a sudden, brutal end, when a slab of concrete crushed his right hind leg. It wasn't the pain that ended his career. It was the diagnosis, partial nerve damage. Enough to fail recertification. Enough for someone, somewhere, to decide he was no longer useful. The next chapter of Rex's life was less clear. Different kennels, different hands, then no hands at all. Just the creak of a car door opening in the middle of nowhere, and a final command, "Stay," and he did. For 3 days he waited at that rural crossroads, until hunger and truth set in. Now he stood at the end of that road, condemned not for what he had done, but for what people thought he might have done. But there are stories that don't begin with headlines or heroes. They begin in shadows, in silence, in a little girl's whispered help echoing from a flooded storm drain, and in the decision of a broken dog to move, not away from danger, but toward it. This is the story of what really happened beneath Oakage, and why the truth would leave an entire town speechless. Before he was a stray, before he was a ghostly figure spotted around town and whispered about in porches and barbershops, he was Rex, badge number K97. A German shepherd trained not just to obey but to think, to protect, and if necessary to sacrifice. Assigned to the Dallas Police Department's elite K9 unit, Rex wasn't just another working dog. He was the standard by which others were measured. 12 major drug busts, 3 missing persons found alive. A silver star for K9 valor, awarded after he tracked an armed suspect through a blazing forest, refusing to abandon his mission, even as the flames licked at his paws. At the heart of those victories was one thing: trust. The bond between Rex and his handler, Captain Richard Harris, was ironclad. You could see it in the way they moved. Perfect synchronicity. Photos hung in the precinct hallway captured it all. The proud tilt of Rex's ears, Harris's hand resting lightly on his partner's back, both gazing into the camera with the ease of warriors who had already seen what most people feared. But even the most disciplined teams aren't immune to fate. The warehouse raid started like any other. Anonymous tip. Suspected meth lab. Rex was first through the door, nose working, paws light. That's when he stopped, still as stone. His hackles rose and he barked sharply. Not once, not twice, but in the distinctive three-pulse warning reserved for imminent structural collapse. Harris hesitated, trusting his own instincts more than the dog's. Rex didn't wait. With a force that surprised even Harris, Rex lunged, pushed, shoved his handler backwards, just as the ceiling gave way. Concrete rained down. Rebar snapped. Like twigs. Harris got out with a bruised shoulder. Rex took the weight of a collapsing wall across his hindquarters. The injuries weren't fatal, but they were career-ending, partial nerve damage to the right hind leg. He could still walk, limp, even run on a good day, but not well enough, not fast enough. He failed recertification. Twice. And so the commendations, the accolades, the respect, they meant nothing now. In the eyes of bureaucracy, Rex had become what no K9 ever wants to be. A liability. They told Harris he'd be retired. There was paperwork, a transfer order, a family in Houston who'd supposedly take him in. Harris wanted to keep Rex himself, but apartment policies and department red tape shut that door firmly. He fought. He pleaded. But in the end, the leash was slipped from his hand. The dog he owed his life to was taken away. That last car ride Rex remembered only in fragments. New hands, different smells. The hum of the highway, the click of a crate. Latch, then nothing. When the crate opened, it was at a rural crossroads with no buildings in sight. Just woods, gravel, and a voice, calm, commanding, stay. So he did. For 3 days, Rex, no longer Rex but unnamed, unclaimed, waited by the side of that forgotten road. Hungry, confused, hurt, but still believing, still obeying. Until the 3rd day, when the realization settled in like the cold. No one was coming back. He moved. Not because he wanted to. Because instinct told him to survive. By the time he limped into Oakridge, Georgia, 3 weeks had passed. His coat, once sleek and trimmed, was matted. His ribs pushed out beneath his skin. But his eyes, they still burned, with the clarity of training and purpose. That was the first time Frank Mitchell saw him. Frank had lived in Oakridge most of his life, save for 2 tours with the Marine Corps. He knew working dogs, their posture, their discipline, their pride. He saw all of that in the way the shepherd lay under the gazebo in Mapleton Park, barely moving, but watching everything. Frank didn't approach, not then. He just stood for a moment, leaning on his cane, the summer sun warming his back. He sipped his coffee and nodded once, a silent soldier's salute. He didn't need to speak. Not yet. Over the following weeks, sightings of the stray became common, especially near dawn. Park maintenance crews reported trash cans upturned, but not raided. He never barked, never chased. He simply moved through the town like a ghost, shadowing. Joggers from a safe distance watching school buses with quiet attention. He didn't act like a stray, because he wasn't one. Not truly. Some mornings Frank would leave a bowl of water by the park bench. Some mornings it would be empty. Some mornings untouched. But Rex, his name forgotten even to himself, was still alive, still moving, still assessing. He slept beneath the park's maintenance shed, curled tightly on a bed of dry leaves. His training never left him. He woke at dawn, scanned the perimeter, evaluated threats. His leg dragged slightly, but his movement remained controlled. Water was his first priority every day. When the park fountain broke, he risked venturing closer, to the residential streets, hoping to find an open hose, a puddle, a shallow bird bath. He never approached porches, never barked at fences, but still, whispers spread. He's too big to be wandering loose. That's not a normal dog. Look at how it watches. He gives me the chills. But it wasn't fear that guided Rex. It was calculation, observation, and discipline that hadn't faded no matter how much the world around him had. What he couldn't calculate, though, was how quickly Oakage's skies could change. The storm rolled in like a freight train, fast, loud, angry. It hadn't been forecasted, at least not to this intensity. Within hours, gutters overflowed, streets flooded, and the town's vast underground drainage system, built decades ago to manage the once every 10 years downpours, was overwhelmed. And somewhere across town, a little girl named Lily Anderson had wandered too close to the canal chasing a leaf boat, and in the moment that mattered most, there was only one creature in Oakage who saw her, who moved toward the rising water, not away from it. He was battered, forgotten, broken. But he remembered who he was. Badge number K97, Elite K9 Unit, Serve, Protect, Rescue, and now, Act. On the other side of town, 7-year-old Lily Anderson had a secret. She was supposed to be at Mrs. Peterson's house while her mother, Rebecca, worked the day shift at Oakage Memorial. But Mrs. Peterson, old and soft-hearted, often fell asleep in front of her daytime dramas. And Lily, with the untamable energy only a child can possess, had discovered her own little world just a few blocks away, the storm drains. To most adults, they were nothing more than concrete trenches carved through neighborhoods meant to carry rainwater. But to Lily they were rivers, mystical channels where leaf boats could race like clipper ships in a storm. She had a backpack full of twigs and leaves, carefully chosen for their shape and strength, and even a favorite special boat her Dad had helped her make before he left. Ranger, still living namelessly, unknowingly near, had begun noticing her. Every morning, as he ventured from his makeshift shelter beneath the maintenance shed, she would appear like clockwork, standing at the edge of the drainage canal with a napkin-wrapped sandwich in hand. Her voice echoed off the concrete. "I know you're down there, dog. Mom says not to feed strays, but you're not a stray, are you? You're too smart." For 3 days she left food and never tried to touch him. She sat cross-legged, launching her leaf boats, talking as if they were old friends. She named him Hero. "You don't eat like the other dogs," she said, one morning, watching him take polite bites. "You chew slow, like you're at a fancy restaurant." That morning the clouds were already thick. The humidity was unbearable. The air was still, the kind of stillness that made even animals uneasy. Ranger knew the signs. Years of search and rescue work had sharpened his senses to pressure changes, atmospheric shifts. By early afternoon, the sky cracked open. Rain came in sheets, sideways and stinging. Winds bent tree limbs, and the gutters overflowed in minutes. Streets became rivers, and the storm drains, normally bone dry, roared to life with surging water. Ranger, watching from behind the hardware store awning, heard the warning through a police cruiser loudspeaker, flash flood warning in effect. All residents are advised to stay indoors and avoid drainage areas. He stood alert, watching, listening. That's when he heard it. A voice, faint over the rain, calling a name with increasing panic. "Lily! Lily!" It was Mrs. Peterson, frantic, soaked to the bone, standing on her porch, shouting into the storm. Her voice cracked with desperation. Something cold bloomed in Ranger's chest. He moved, not away from the voice, but toward it, toward danger. He reached the drainage canal in minutes, moving faster than he had in weeks, ignoring the pain in his damaged leg. The canal, normally a shallow dip in the concrete, was now a swirling torrent. And there, clinging to a maintenance ladder halfway down the wall, was Lily. She was shaking, one shoe missing, her small frame soaked and trembling. Her backpack had been swept away. The water licked at her feet, rising inch by inch. "Help!" she screamed. "Somebody help me!" Ranger's tactical brain activated, unbidden. Water velocity too high, entry unsafe, position precarious, but temporarily stable. Protocol, locate and alert human assistance. He tilted his head back and howled. 3. Long, sharp howls. The trained distress signal, the one he hadn't used in months. No answer, the streets were empty. The storm had driven everyone indoors. He howled again. Nothing. And so he returned to the child. She saw him coming and sobbed. "Good dog. Please go get help," he whimpered in response, ears flicking. He couldn't explain what she didn't. No, that help wasn't coming. So he climbed. Carefully, step by step, he descended the slick ladder rungs until he reached the rung just beneath her. He pressed his body against her legs, using his weight as a counterbalance. Her shaking lessened. "Slightly. What are you doing?" she gasped. He didn't answer. He couldn't, but he stayed. For 20 minutes they remained like that, dog and child, braced against rising water and the pull of the current. Every time the water surged, Ranger shifted slightly, taking the brunt of the wave. But it wasn't enough. The water kept rising. He nudged her, directing her gaze upward. She looked at the top of the ladder and shook her head. "I can't. I'm too cold." But Ranger persisted, using his muzzle to nudge her upward. Finally, she began to climb. Step by painful step, she reached the top. Ranger followed, his legs screaming in protest, his balance wavering. But they made it. Just beyond the canal's edge was the opening of a large concrete tunnel, a drainage pipe, usually dry, now flooding, slowly from within. Ranger guided her inside, not deep, just far enough to escape the wind. The slope inside rose slightly, offering elevation. Shelter. She collapsed against the wall, shivering uncontrollably. "I'm so cold," she whispered. He curled around her, pressing his body tight, offering what warmth his thin, soaked fur could provide. Her small hand gripped his ruff, her tears soaking into his side. But time was not on their side. The water level continued to rise, inching toward them. The tunnel trembled with the roar of storm surge. Ranger knew they couldn't stay. He shifted, preparing to leave. He would have to find help somehow. But Lily whimpered, clinging harder. "Don't leave me." He hesitated, torn between instinct and loyalty. That's when the water surged again, stronger than before. It slammed into the tunnel with a crash, sending a wave straight at them. Lily screamed. Ranger lunged, grabbing her jacket collar with the precision of his training, not biting, not tearing, just holding. He pulled her farther up the incline, higher. Ground. But his footing slipped. They tumbled, his body twisted midair, shielding her. Her head struck the concrete wall, and then she went limp in his jaws. Ranger stood in the darkness, breathing hard, water rushing at his paws, and a child unconscious. In his mouth, he turned and carried her toward the light. Frank Mitchell heard the howl before he saw anything. It pierced the steady drum of rain against his windows, a long, deliberate, three-note signal that reached deep into his bones. Not just because of its urgency, but because he knew exactly what it meant. It was the distress call, the trained vocal alert of a search and rescue K9. For a moment, Frank didn't move. He stood still, gripping the window frame, his knuckles white. Then without a word, he grabbed his cane, his raincoat, and a flashlight, ignoring the protests of his aching knee. He was already out the door when his neighbor Margaret Winters called out, "Frank Mitchell, you're not going out in this storm, are you?" "There's a dog out there who's trying to say something," he replied, not slowing his pace. "It's that same stray," Margaret sniffed. "The big German shepherd. Animal control's been useless." Frank stopped. "No, Margaret," he said quietly. "That was a call for help, from someone trained." Down at the canal, the water churned with debris. Frank's flashlight cut through the murk, searching for movement. And then he saw him, soaked, mud-streaked, frantic, the shepherd. He barked at Frank, then dashed a few steps toward the broken section of fencing, then turned back, barked again, intentional, urgent. "What is it, boy?" Frank called. The dog repeated the behavior. Classic guide response. Lead and look. Frank followed. By the time they reached the embankment, neighbors were starting to gather, drawn by the barking, by Frank's shouts, by the strange magnetism of unfolding crisis. Margaret arrived in a poncho, clutching her purse like a weapon. The Johnsons from across the street came running. A few younger faces appeared, teenagers with phones, already recording. Then someone spotted it. A sodden pink backpack. Half buried in the mud, Frank's stomach dropped. "Oh God," he whispered, "Lily." He fumbled with his phone, calling 911 with hands that trembled, not from fear but from cold and fury. "There's a child," he told dispatch, and service dog. I think he's trying to help. Minutes later, red and blue lights cut through the storm. Sheriff Bennett stepped out of the cruiser, drenched and stern-faced. "This better not be another false alarm, Mitchell." Frank didn't flinch. "It's not. That dog is trained, Sheriff. I'd bet my life on it." "He's a stray," came Margaret's voice. "I've seen it skulking for weeks. Probably dragged that poor girl into the tunnel." Frank turned. "You really believe that? That a dog with search and rescue training lured a child into a flooded storm drain to harm her?" "She was unconscious," Margaret countered, pointing to the blood on the dog's chest. "Explain that." Before anyone could respond, the dog, mud-slick and trembling, began digging. Frantic, purposeful, clearing debris from the mouth of a drainage tunnel. His massive paws worked in rhythm, not random, not wild, trained. "He's trying to get in," Frank said aloud. "He knows where she is." Firefighters arrived. Officer Jake Collins, in swift water gear, watched the shepherd's movements carefully. His eyes narrowed. "That's textbook," he murmured. "That's not instinct, that's field protocol. He's clearing an extraction path." Sheriff Bennett keyed his radio. "Dispatch, confirm with Helen Peterson. Is Lily Anderson at her residence?" A pause, then static. Then, negative. "Helen Peterson says Lily was watching TV but is now missing." Bennett's jaw clenched. Damn it. The dog, undeterred by human debate, had forced his way into the tunnel. "Stop that animal," Margaret cried. "He's going after her." "No," Colin said firmly. "Wait, watch." They waited. Rain fell. The canal roared, then, barking, not panicked, patterned, short bursts. Then, a voice, faint, childlike, weak. "Help." Collins didn't wait. "I'm going in." The team sprang into motion, ropes and harnesses flung into position. Within minutes, Collins disappeared into the tunnel. Tension held the crowd hostage. Then, out of the darkness, the shepherd emerged. Backward, careful, clutched in his jaws. Lily Anderson, unconscious, soaked, but breathing. He carried her gently, precisely, avoiding further injury. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "My God," someone whispered. He brought her out. Paramedics rushed in. The shepherd set Lily down carefully, then backed away, tail low but not tucked. Not fearful, respectful. "She's got a pulse," the EMT shouted. "We've got her." Frank watched with pride, swelling in his chest. The dog stood still, watching his work be taken over by humans, mission complete. And then, "He's got blood on his face," Margaret shrieked. "Look, it attacked her." Eyes turned. Whispers started. Bennett's hand drifted to his belt. "Back away from the dog," he ordered. "No," Frank said quickly. "That blood came from her head wound. He didn't bite her. He carried her. That's how K9s transport unconscious victims." "We don't know that," Bennett said. "It's standard protocol. If a dog is involved in a child injury, we contain it." "Contain it?" Frank echoed. "That dog just saved her life." The shepherd, perhaps sensing the shift, looked once at Frank, then turned and ran. "Get animal control," Bennett barked. "We need to bring that dog in, now." The dog vanished into the storm, swallowed by night and water. Frank stood silent as the ambulance pulled away, carrying Lily to the hospital. Beside him, Margaret folded her arms. "That dog is dangerous," she said. Frank didn't answer, but in his heart he made a vow. He would find that dog, and this time he wouldn't let the world forget what a hero looked like. By morning, Oakage was no longer just wet. It was wounded. The storm had passed, but the aftermath clung to everything. Streets were slick with mud and debris. Fences leaned where water had eroded their foundations, and people spoke in hushed voices about the dog, the one who saved the girl. The one who ran, the one who might be dangerous. Frank Mitchell had been up all night. Alongside Officer Jake Collins, they'd searched the back alleys, parks, and culverts for any sign of the German Shepherd. And just after sunrise, they found him, curled beneath a hedge behind a house on Maple Street, too exhausted to run anymore, but still alert, still watching. Frank approached slowly, cane in one hand, palm outstretched. No one's here to hurt. "You soldier?" he said softly, and the dog, mud-caked and limping, lowered his head. They scanned him for a chip. The reader beeped. Dallas Police Department, badge K97. His name wasn't Stray. It was Rex. He was a retired K9, left behind after a career-ending injury. Presumed adopted out, but somehow discarded like yesterday's news. Collins made the calls. Dallas confirmed the story. There had been paperwork. A handler who couldn't keep him. A transport service. A shelter that never received him. Somewhere along the chain, someone had failed him. Someone had taken the dog trained to save lives and abandoned him to the roadside. And yet, here he was. Saving lives anyway. At the vet clinic, Dr. Porter examined him with clinical precision but gentle hands. Malnourished, yes. Anemic, yes. But no aggression. No unpredictability. Just discipline. And a body pushed beyond its limits by loyalty. Rebecca. Anderson arrived just after noon, still in her hospital scrubs. Her daughter Lily was recovering steadily, and her only question had been, "Is Hero okay?" She knelt before the shepherd, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my daughter." Rex pressed his head gently into her chest, still and dignified. Outside, though, storm clouds were gathering again, only this time political. Margaret Winters had filed a formal petition with the Oakridge Town Council. Her demand was simple: declare the dog a public danger. Remove him or put him down. She had signatures, neighbors who'd seen Rex lurking, parents whose kids felt uneasy, residents who said a dog that big shouldn't roam. The hearing was set for the next day. Frank didn't wait. He started making calls. To veterans, to former K9 handlers, to anyone who could speak to what a dog like Rex truly was. Collins contacted Dallas PD. Within hours, a name surfaced. Captain Richard Harris, Rex's original handler. He was on assignment but would try to get there. Rebecca filed a counter-petition, demanding Rex be placed with her family, legally, permanently. And Lily? She drew a picture. A German shepherd with a cape carrying a little girl out of a flood. She labeled it in bold crayon, Hero Rex. The next day, the town hall was packed. Frank, cane in hand, led Rex inside. The shepherd walked at heel, his coat brushed clean, his posture regal. He made no sound, didn't bark, didn't flinch, just moved like what he was. A soldier. Rebecca followed, pushing Lily in a wheelchair. Dr. Porter came with medical files. Officer Collins stood by the door. Across the aisle, Margaret Winters sat among her supporters, expression hard as granite. Mayor Wilson called the hearing to order. Margaret spoke first. She cited town ordinances, listed complaints, read from her petition. She said the dog had prowled, said it had blood on its muzzle, said no one really knew what happened in that tunnel. She used the word dangerous 6 times. Then she sat down, satisfied. Rebecca stood. She spoke clearly, professionally. She described what Rex had done, that he hadn't barked or bitten or chased, that he had carried her unconscious child from rising water and laid her gently at their feet. "This isn't a stray," she said. "This is a trained officer. He didn't drag Lily into danger. He pulled her from it." Dr. Porter went next. "No signs of aggression," she said. "Everything in his behavior is consistent with service training. The blood was not from an attack. It was transferred during rescue." Collins added details about Rex's techniques, how only elite K9s are trained to carry unconscious humans the way he did. And then Frank stood. He didn't raise his voice. "I served 26 years with Marine K9 units," he said. I know the difference between instinct and training, between panic and purpose. That dog never stopped being a protector, even when the world gave up on him. Lily's voice was the last. I was scared, she said softly into the microphone. But Hero was there. He didn't bark, he didn't hurt me, he kept me warm, he made me feel safe. The room was silent until the doors opened, and a man in uniform stepped inside, Captain Richard Harris. He walked slowly down the aisle. Rex lifted his head. Recognition lit his eyes. His tail moved, once. His name, Harris said, is Rex. Badge K97. He saved my life, and I let him down. He described the raid, the injury, the red tape, his guilt, and then he looked at the council. You're not voting on a dog. You're voting on a decorated officer, and if you condemn him now, you're not protecting this town. You're betraying what it stands for. The council voted 3-1. Rex would stay, he would live. When the gavel fell and the vote was counted, something shifted, not just in the air, but in the people of Oakridge. The danger was never the dog. It was what the dog reminded them of, how easily fear can override truth, how swiftly we can discard what we don't understand. But now that fear had been named, faced, overruled, and Rex, Badge K97, hero to a little girl and warrior to a fading world, was no longer just surviving. He was going home. Outside the town hall, the spring sun broke through the clouds, casting long golden streaks across the sidewalk still stained with floodwater. Rebecca knelt beside Rex and gently looped a new collar around his neck. On the tag, freshly engraved, it read, Rex Protector Family Home. Lily threw her arms around his neck, giggling as he licked her cheek. See? She whispered into his ear. I told you it would be okay. Rex didn't wag wildly, he didn't bark. He simply pressed his head against her shoulder and let his eyes close for one long moment. A soldier, finally at rest. Frank watched. From a short distance, leaning on his cane, a quiet pride in his chest. He had seen men forgotten after service. He'd seen medals gather dust and stories disappear into silence. But Rex's story wouldn't fade. Not now. Officer Collins approached. With a quiet smile, You still think he's just a dog? Frank chuckled. No, not for a second, he's a damn miracle. The weeks that followed saw Rex slowly regain weight and strength. Dr. Porter oversaw his therapy. Frank taught Rebecca and Lily how to work with his commands. And every few days, Captain Harris returned, sometimes with treats, sometimes with tears in his eyes. They shared custody, in a way that only those who understood loyalty could. But more than that, Rex became something new to Oakridge. Children, who once crossed the street, now asked to pet him. Elderly neighbors began leaving bowls of water on their porches. Margaret Winters, grudgingly at first, started calling him the war dog, and eventually added, "Maybe he's not so bad." Something in the town had softened. Perhaps it was the reminder that dignity doesn't fade with age, that usefulness isn't measured by speed or strength, but by heart. Rex didn't need a uniform anymore. His presence was enough. At night, he would lie by Lily's bed, ears twitching at distant sounds, his breath calm, his mission now transformed, from patrols and perimeters to warmth and watchfulness. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear scars, some walk with a limp, some wait. In silence for someone to believe in them again. Rex waited, and they did. And if you ask the people of Oakridge what changed their minds, most won't mention the hearing, or the speech, or the paperwork. They'll talk about the moment that dog stepped from the shadows, carrying a child in his mouth like glass, risking everything, though no one had asked him to. They'll talk about the way he looked, muddy, limping, blood-stained, and how, even then, his eyes never wavered from the work, from the calling, from the duty. And as for what comes next? Well, stay tuned, because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in floods or courtrooms. Sometimes they're fought in healing. And the next chapter of Rex's story, the long road home, the trust rebuilt, the legacy renewed, That's a story we're only beginning to tell.